Welcome back to another episode of Chats with Clark. I'm the host, Joe Clark, and here at Chats with Clark, we don't do poppy intros. We get straight to the point. And the point today is Steve Schoenwald. Steve, thanks for having me. How you doing?
I am doing great. It's a pleasure to be on here. It's exciting. I'm actually in my father's old home from when he was a kid, so it's cool to be able to reminisce on the things that I've done and see where we're going in the future in this type of a setting.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be in this special place that means so much to you, and then of course now to me too. So
Likewise.
yeah, thank you.
All right.
So Steve, you've been working for like 10 years on this project because I've known you for the most of the time on a project called GXC, which is in the education world. Did you want to touch on that software that you're developing?
Oh yeah, I could touch on stuff like that for a very long time. What GXC is it's a learning management platform that has a lot of unique characteristics. Other than compared to what's out there, especially legacy providers. I could talk about this for hours, so I'll give you the short version first, and we could go from there. Basically, legacy providers are either really they're either really expensive, so you have ones like Blackboard, Canvas, etc., or you have ones that really don't do much, like Google Classroom, which is free. There's only about 50% of schools in the United States that use a learning management system. And it's not because it's not useful, it is because it is so expensive or just generally too hard to set up or not particularly useful. So one of the things that we were trying to do is myself and my the co-founder of GXC, Robert Horomarski, we ended up experiencing a lot of problems in education, and we thought that we could find some ways to actually resolve those. So one of the first things that we were trying to do was to lower the cost of education, but simultaneously make sure that we were able to provide as good or better features than what any of the legacy providers offered. So for a project like this, that's why it's taken us so long. Progressively over time, at first we were meeting up, every other week. Then it started to be every week, then every day, and now it's turned into a full-time job for both of us. But in regard to our platform, one of the first things that we tried to do was cost reduction. And I had been talking to someone from India, and he's someone who's in the education and technology space, and he says, if you're going to be able to offer something in this area, in these poorest regions, you need to make sure that your education offering is $2 or less a month.
Wow.
Like, we wanted to do a lot with videos, and that makes things, of course, very difficult because there's hosting costs, there's egress, which is data transfer costs. Thinking, wow, how are we going to do something like that? Because if we really want to have this significant moral impact, we have to be able to not only help the people here, which is of course very much important to us, but those people in those poorest regions as well. And we gave it a lot of consideration, and we found some ways that we would actually be able to get it to $2 a month and even cheaper. And one of the things that we're working on right now is actually finding a way that we could have these high-end video-intensive processes with some translation capability and actually have it offered for free. So we are absolutely ecstatic about the potential of this. GXC has generally tried to focus on addressing the needs of historically marginalized groups. We're talking about people that are poor, people that are dispersed in, let's say, rural areas, or in, let's say, if you're talking Guatemala, mountainous type regions where you can't just move to place, and non-native English speakers. Because when you look at education disparity and the growing, is generally called the homework gap or the education gap, what the groups that are most affected are those three groups. So we wanted to make sure that we could focus on something that would be of significant use to typical type students, but also to them as well, so that that growing gap could really start to close. And with what's happened this last year with the pandemic and lots of people using Zoom, while there's been opportunities there for that gap to actually be reduced, we've actually seen it widen further because the tools, Zoom is not an education platform. It is useful, but it was always intended to be a meeting platform, and they're just shoehorning it in there right now. Other platforms, when you talk about the legacy providers, it is extremely expensive to have video included in plans. As a matter of fact, when you look at the big, I remember the pricing from November of last year. If you wanted just a gigabyte of storage per student, you were talking about adding an extra $100 or $200 on for the student, which is of course absurd. Right. Now, some of them allow for collaborations with hosting providers, but then the integration isn't as good. If you think about how much an hour of HD video is, how much space that takes up, you could generally say it's about a gigabyte. Now, there's ways to compress it or whatnot. If you're just recording something from a camera, though, you're in a classroom, you need something thrown in the back, that's going to take up a lot of space. But when they're going to charge for your total storage an extra $100 or let's say 50, 25, you're never going to be able to actually record stuff and have it be useful for viewing. So one of the things that we've tried to do is really reduce the data storage and data egress costs. Again, egress being data storage. I have to remember that's not a term that most people are familiar with. And we started out with a pricing plan that was 10 cents per month, or we had arranged for it to be 10 cents per gigabyte stored per month and 20 cents per gigabyte data transfer costs. And when we looked at how much that was compared to the legacy providers for what we were offering, and I'll get into some more of that momentarily, it seemed to offer some really good value. But again, because some schools just say that they can't afford any learning management system at all, so we wanted to do something beyond that. So while we were trying to figure that out, I'm sort of skipping back and forth here, so I apologize for that. No. We thought, what did the future of education look like? So this is let's talk about 2016. So we have a very basic platform in place. I end up talking to the presidents and CIOs of some of the local universities, Cleveland State University, University of Akron, Case Western Reserve University, and I showed them what we had. It was only for Windows desktop at the time, and they gave some good feedback, which primarily said they wanted there to be more of a mobile focus because they saw the future of education going towards mobile access. I thought, okay, that makes sense, and they were saying that they would be willing to try a lesson for a good amount of users if we were to do that. Well, it's also not an easy task when you only have yourself and some others, so we were able to onboard some additional people who, God bless them, were working below market value or volunteering their time because they believed in our mission. All the credit in the world goes out to the people that have helped because there's no chance without the incredible leadership of Robert on the technical side and the very capable moral people who have helped to build this up. We would never even be close to where we are today.
Yeah, that's great.
What was I talking about? So we decided to develop the mobile-based applications and really make what GXC was a video-first platform and a mobile-first platform. So everything, we have a number of unique video features. We have traditional adjustable picture-in-picture type technology, which is actually patent pending right now. Picture-in-picture used to be a lot more common when you had analog television, but there's a reason why you don't see that in, like you'll get stuff in live streams, for instance, where you have different quadrants, but that's really just reducing the video quality of each quadrant as small as you want to make it. So you could potentially only have a couple bytes, megabytes, whatever going at a second, but then you can't adjust any of that stuff afterwards. One of the things that we did was make sure that whatever was being recorded, let's say it's a professor by a blackboard, you could have a second stream, which could be another video, or a desktop feed, for instance. What we were seeing, let's say in medical education, is there'd be a videographer who'd be in the back of a room, and he'd start recording, and there wouldn't be, he wouldn't know what was most important to focus on. So sometimes they'd switch to slides, or sometimes to the board or the presenter, but it wouldn't really make sense. Like sometimes you want to just see some information that's not there. But that shouldn't really be on the videographer either, because he doesn't know this stuff. He's just taking his best guess.
Right.
This way, it is possible for the student to choose whatever they're most interested in, or whatever they think is most useful to them at a given time. So they could turn or on or off picture in picture, and then they could switch the feeds as well. So if you have your small picture in picture being, let's say, a desktop screen, and there's some text on there you wanted to read, you could switch it to your main feed, make it full screen, and there you go. You haven't lost any quality, because everything is like that. The difficult part was the synchronization process, but we were able to come up with a solution for that, so that's very cool. Another really unique thing that we did with it is the neural translation process, and this was to help the non-native English speakers. So basically, you have your courses, and let's say you're able to get subtitles for them. And there's ways that you can generate subtitles yourselves. Let's say you have a professional set, though, because that works with the numbers best. It is really expensive to professionally translate stuff in one language to another, but it's generally always necessary, because you need to maintain that context. And especially if you're talking in graduate level education, there's some terms where if it's even off a little bit, you're in really big trouble. Mm-hmm. So we looked at what was available with translation services, and traditionally Google Translate, for example, uses what's called a phrase-based translation system. And while they've been moving away from that more recently, what it basically gave generally about 70% translation accuracy. It would look at a single sentence, look at the phrasing, and come up with the best guess for what you were talking about based off of that. Now, there's some problems there, because there's a colorful example I like to use. If there's a sentence that says, "How high are you right now?" it's always going to choose altitude. If you're reading a story or an article or something, and it ends up saying, there are other context clues outside the sentence that might talk about munchies or marijuana or something similar to that. How do you pick up on those and have the appropriate translation? Well, that's where neural translation comes in. So what we do is we split apart the subtitle file. We analyze the entire transcript for a lecture, and we obtain whatever the context is through context clues throughout the entire lecture. Then we end up getting a translation for it, reassembling it into both segments that fit on the screen, those are the closed captions, and sentence delineated subtitles as well, so we have them split apart, so for however the user wants to view them. And then those are sent to the users themselves. We've been able to make this so that if you have an hour-long lecture, typically around 12 to 14 seconds, you will have a neural translation on even your phone for the entire lecture that you can search through. So you could actually do text searches, a variety. We have a whole lot of search capabilities that you can do with that. Yeah. Oh yeah. Very useful for international students who could have the original closed captions and then the translated subtitles set below. I've talked with a number of international students, and they said one of the most difficult things was not actually the concepts themselves, but just learning the language. Now they have a highly relevant translation, a highly accurate translation that you could look at along with the original closed caption, so they're better learning the language at the same time. I forgot to mention, the accuracy of the neural translation process, even for Asian languages, which are the most difficult from English, is about 92 to 93%.
It's amazing.
A huge jump up from
Yeah.
the 76% that you saw before. And by doing that, you're also able to achieve Title VI compliance. There are various government types of compliance that you can get for people that are disabled. So we wanted to provide something that was high enough quality that could actually qualify for those as well. So some really, really cool stuff that we have there. So we have the mobile base, the video focus, that the translation content. We also made sure that, schools that didn't want to use any video, those sorts of things, no problem. You still had traditional learning management features like posting and editing announcements, posting up assignments, being able to grade them. One of the cool things that we actually have with grading is depending on who is grading something, if they are, let's say, an instructor, they'll have full access to grade either on a person-by-person basis or on a question-by-question basis.
Wow.
Because it's a lot more efficient to be able to just say, I'm going to focus on one question and grade everyone, so you don't have to flip through everyone's and say, okay, how was I grading this before? Am I doing this easier or worse? Stuff like that. For a teaching assistant, it actually blocks out all student identifiers, so they could only do the question by question one. And every time they switch from one question to another or return back, it randomizes all of the ungraded questions. So if someone were to do something to serve as a tip because they know that a teaching assistant will be grading stuff, they're no longer going to be able to effectively cheat because the stuff is going to be out of order.
Wow. Yeah.
So we tried to have anti-cheating mechanisms. We have stuff in security for anti-video recording mechanisms, because that was something that actually former President Berkman at Cleveland State University was talking about. Security for the videos, making sure that they had their intellectual property maintained, is something very important. So we made sure that just as a baseline, the video couldn't be recorded, but we also developed some ways where because any type of security can be broken, no matter how good it is. If someone decided to break apart a video, they would have a whole bunch of different problems. And I actually got some patents to cover these concepts. For instance, let's say you're trying to record a desktop feed. You're only going to get a black screen. Let's say you're trying to collect an audio feed. You're only going to get static. Let's say you decompile everything so that you have, so basically you're trying to extract the video. Video segments are thrown in different places, so you're going to be looking at different parts of the video if you somehow are able to get past the first layers of security. So nothing's going to make sense. You're going to have clips from all over the place. You're going to have multiple audio feeds as well. You could have 7 different streams, and parts of the correct audio are in the 7 different streams. Well, what are you going to do there? We have stuff where after a certain number of views, the video will automatically corrupt if you have it downloaded. Or after a certain number of time has passed, it will automatically corrupt. So yeah, any one of these things, let's say you're a technical genius, you get past it, you're going to have a whole lot of other problems to deal with. So really, we've tried to cover all of our bases with this. One of the more challenging aspects when describing this, and aside from just finding someone willing to listen to me rant for however long it takes me to even go through this shortened version, right? Is that first of all, they know that this is a learning management system in general. They exist. I make no qualms about other ones not existing, but they know that even for the ones that exist, that they aren't necessarily very good, and they cost a ton of money to make. So sometimes people think, yeah, you get just some junk. They don't even bother to take a look because they don't think that we could have possibly done anything worthwhile. I would gladly put our learning management system against any competitor out there with all of the capabilities it has.
That's wild. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's really exciting. Some of the difficulty now and over the past year, because we had versions while we were still working on iOS until recently. I mean, we're still working on everything, but to get it to a point that we considered production ready. One of the problems was that you end up talking to schools and superintendents, and I've had a number of them, because I've contacted every school district in the state of Ohio, for instance.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Congrats. Yeah.
Even the parochial ones as well. And for those that were willing to respond back to me or talk to me about it, they basically said, we agree that what you have is better than what we're using now. But the problem is you are so small and you don't have a track record. So if we go with you during this pandemic year instead of Zoom is established. If we say we're using Zoom, people will be like, oh yeah, well that's the standard in, video recording. If we go with you and anything goes wrong, our jobs are on the line, and that's too high of a risk. The number of rejections I've actually gotten like that has been quite high.
Wow. Yeah.
So believe it or not, despite all of that, what I had to do is actually look internationally to get our initial pilots. And our initial pilots actually just started this past summer.
Okay.
Well,
Awesome.
this actually back in May. One of which is with a Japanese school in Okinawa, Japan. And since they're an English language school, there was more applicability. And Okinawa, keep in mind, it's not part of the main chain of Japanese islands. There's a big U.S. military presence there, so there's more international speaking that's required, and it's well off from everywhere else. So being able to get something where people who are somewhat dispersed can get those accurate translations, that video up, that was something that was important to that school. There's also, I should say, a consultancy group based out of Maryland that works with international chambers of commerce, and they actually talk to 6 other learning management system providers, which basically are the big ones, and they said that they needed some adjustments to be able to do what they wanted to establish these zones and really get people engaged in these other regions. And they just said outright they aren't going to do it. So they were basically just going to shelve their plans to do this, even though they were getting money from the U.S. government and they were getting in negotiations to get money from these other governments as well, because they have been doing presentations and working with some of them for years. No luck. And then through a recommendation that a mentor from a local organization called Jumpstart gave, he told the head of that organization, who's actually the former head of the National Inventors Hall of Fame, as it so happened, about GXC. He reached out to us. I showed them what we had, and they said that there were a few modifications for what they needed, but they were really impressed with what we had, and they said GXC, to them, for their purposes, they care about it less as a learning management system and more as an ultimate collaboration platform, their words. Since what they're doing really isn't about grades and examinations and that sort of thing, they wanted to be able to have so many ways through forums, through video, where these people could communicate and these international people come together. So as they're establishing those entrepreneurial zones over there, they would be part of this program. People from the United States and other regions would talk about entrepreneurship, how to build this stuff up, and then through their videos being able to show off what they're doing in their areas, be able to talk with other people in the program and entrepreneurs and businesses in the United States to really help grow their business, which then in turn would be good for the United States because there would be more trade for goods that are not necessarily produced here.
Absolutely.
That group predominantly works in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, some areas in Asia as well. So there's a lot of broad reach. They said that if everything works out, with at the end of this pilot that they believe that a serious estimate would be they could get 100,000 people on the platform within 1 year. Yeah, so that would be absolutely enormous for us to be able to develop some of these new things. And I've been rambling for quite a while now, so there's more that I could talk about for some of our future projects. But that is what we've been doing with GXC, the learning management system aspect of GXC, and it's very exciting, and I couldn't be prouder of my team for all of the hurdles that they've overcome. Because we're talking about young guys here. Okay, I'm at 31 right now on the older end of things. Wow. So only my co-founder, 1 year older, is the oldest. Everyone else is younger, and they've had to learn cutting edge programming languages and technologies, because there's usually you'd be able to look up online some sort of reference for how to do some of this stuff. It's patented or patent pending type stuff. There's no good guide for how to do some of these things. So they've really had to learn how to do these things based off of their own experiences and logic. And I just really want to give them all the credit of the world. I am so incredibly appreciative for those guys on the team. So Team GXC, you guys are awesome.
They sound like it. How did you compile such an amazing team too? Because when you have such innovative ideas, and when you're trying to break through what is such a gargantuan system, right? Like the education system, and competitors like Canvas or like Blackboard are huge, as you know. So when you
billion-dollar companies,
there you go. To corral a team that's willing to go up against Goliath, how does that come about for you, and how did you have success in creating such a dynamic team?
Well, that's quite an interesting story in and of itself. I'll say, how did I get success? That actually starts with something that I did a long time ago. I was working on GXC at the time, but it was just me and my co-founder. So we're talking about, let's see, oh wow, 10 years ago now. 10 years ago now. So in addition to what I do with GXC, I was first onboarded. I guess I need to give a little bit of a extra background. I mean, I was first on board as a senior in high school at the Cleveland Clinic. I was doing a research project on anesthesia research, specifically on the effects of photoplethysmography. And I worked with a Dr. Jonathan Doyle, who had both a MD and PhD at the clinic. I was doing that for a few months. I ended up then transferring, because that was rather advanced for me at the time. I ended up transferring to clinical engineering, which still is something, because they hadn't brought on anyone before that wasn't a couple years into their college career. So I got there, and there was a lot to learn. They completely terrified me the first day by giving me a book for how to work through, learn about this new anesthesia machine, everything that it does. Gosh. And keep in mind, engineering, IT, those sorts of things, I had intended to go either into the health sciences or business. Actually, when I went to CASE, my concentration was in healthcare economics. Half of the courses I did were in biology and chemistry. Yeah. But business is why I ended up really doing my focus in, because I think that it's interesting. I think that the scientific method can be applied in virtually all aspects of life. It's incredibly useful general knowledge to have, I think. So I went there, and I remember being so nervous that night studying that book. And they tested me the next day, and they said, we've got to admit, while your terminology was off, I mean, you only had a day, general knowledge about how this connected to that and those sorts of things, we were really impressed at how well you did off of one day. They were trying to make it seem like they would fire me after a day if I did a bad job, but they actually said, it's clear you're actually looking through this stuff, so you'll be the youngest person that we've brought on for this internship, but we'll do it.
That's cool.
And yeah, 2 years was their period for the clinical engineering internship. I did that. Then I transitioned into it was sort of a pseudo internship, pseudo regular type of a role, but I continued on through the rest of my time at Case, and I was doing clinical engineering work, which allowed me to go into operating rooms during surgery. High pressure situations, there's a problem. You have to determine, do you fix the equipment now or replace it? And you have these doctors that are like, this stuff has to go. So got to see some very interesting things, learn a lot there, but that was pushing me more towards engineering. And again, at this time, I'm doing health science stuff in business at Case. So around the same time, I was actually introduced to some anime and visual novels. Visual novel, for those not familiar, is a type of game where you basically have visuals on the screen, usually character sprites, and they're talking to you, and there's a whole lot of text. They're very, very long. It's less of a game. There's some decisions that you have to make, and that creates different routes, different decisions that are made, lots of so-called bad ends, but there is one main route that you end up going through, and sometimes there's a few good routes, but usually one main route. Well, there was one there that particularly interested me called Clannad, and the anime, which is even today widely acclaimed as one of the best anime ever, had finished airing around that time. And I was talking with some people online who are interested in this stuff. Well, there was a visual novel, a spin-off of Clannad called Tomorrow After, which a few other people had tried to translate into English because there wasn't an official English translation for any of this stuff. It was done by fan subgroups, those sorts of things. So this project had been picked up and dropped a number of times. They were even calling it a cursed project. And this one fan sub group decided to pick it up. They had started up a whole visual novel department, and within like 2 months, the guy who was supposed to lead it left. So the head of it came up to me and said, "Hey, we know that you're a big fan of this stuff. Would you mind leading this project?" I thought, okay, this offers me a rather unique opportunity, because if I do it, there's going to be no other way, because fan subgroups, they all do stuff for free, okay? Regardless of what you think about whether they should be distributing copyright content or not. I thought, if I end up doing this, I'll be able to get experience leading a team and doing it with next to no money. Keep in mind, I'm starting up GXC. I know that this is going to be something that I'm going to have to do because I don't have any resources other than my savings. And, despite me being a saver my entire life, there's only so far that that's going to go when you need a highly trained technical team. I said, okay, that seems like a great opportunity. But if I do that, then, and they distribute copyright content, I don't want that to be on my record as well. It's a whole philosophical debate whether or not distributing something that's digitized should be, should be free to distribute, or if the content creator should have it or not. I'm not going to get into any of that. I just decided that, okay, if they will agree to my terms, which were specifically that I did not want the game itself distributed. The patch, because I did some research into this, there's something called the Bean Convention between the United States and Japan, which says that translations are the copyright for translations are owned by the translator. It's not the original content creator. I said, so if we make a patch that has this stuff translated, then we should be in the clear. I will do it then, but I absolutely do not want the game distributed. And they said, okay. So I started looking around from people I knew, people in this space who had Japanese knowledge, and assembled a team that had translators. It had editors. It has what's called quality control people. And the the games, when you divide out it's something called real life, where you have a bunch of scenes. Well, we would assign people to do specific scenes, and if there was a certain type of character that it was focused on, we try and isolate them to those groups. And of course, there were some people that wouldn't end up doing as much or did less quality of a job, so then I would have to focus on replacing them or putting them in an area where they could be best utilized. And within a year, we ended up getting the game translated, which was really, really cool.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Defeating the curse.
A lot of people were very happy to play through the game. Now, I ended up leaving the translation group because I wanted to have that experience there, and it was taking up a lot of time. But afterwards, just as one more side note about the creators of the game, Key Visual Arts. Visual Arts is actually it's a holding company that owns some smaller studios. The biggest name one is Key, and they ended up talking with the rest of the people on the team to have it adapted for a different version, for a proper, official, localized English release. And they did so based off of the translation patch that we had. So on July 1st, 2016, they released Tomorrow After English Edition, and I'm actually listed in the credits of that game for having led the prior team. So that's really cool. For something that meant a lot to me with the original visual novel and anime Clannad, to be able to actually be in the credits of the Otherworld sequel game, that was cool to be involved in that in some way. So
that is.
So going back to your original question, how did I get the experience? I gained a lot of experience by doing that, because one of the most challenging parts for a good manager is to be able to manage a team, keep them focused, but you don't want to have your thumb on them. You want to give them the autonomy that they need, but you also need to make sure that they're doing their job. And when you're paying people, there's some extra weight that you have, because if they don't do what you say, they aren't getting paid.
Yeah.
But
I paid you to do this, you didn't do it.
Exactly. But in something like that, you have to find other ways to motivate them.
Sure.
And my experience there, because I only had my savings to work with GXC, I use those same techniques to help bring on other team members. Now, who are people that could potentially give you an above average or greater than expected return on investment, if you want to look at it that way? And one of the best ways that I could consider is collegiate students. One of the big problems with higher education right now is that people graduate from college, they look for a job, and introductory level jobs say that you need 3 to 5 years of experience. Well, how on earth are you going to get that? For all of the base level introductory positions, and you're saying something that you need several years of experience.
Yeah.
But no one wants to pay for the internships now because of changing ways of doing business. It's too expensive. They're just going to move on to other places. So a lot of students, even when I was in college, were having that problem, and it's still prevalent today. So I thought, if we were able to find high quality people who were highly technical and who believed in our vision, we would be able to provide them with the experience that they need through true mentorship. And again, Robert is an incredible programmer. He actually won an award in 2016 for the best for the HVAC industry, best application developed in the year that affected that space. And he was the second and third place winners. One was LG, like multi-billion-dollar
Yeah.
company LG, and another one was a tool-making company which was still worth over $1 billion. So he was a solo developer on that project. So with someone like him offering mentorship, and it helps our goal trying to better promote a better educational atmosphere. We found people at local schools and we brought them in. Um, of course, difficult at the time. We have a workspace for GXC, but it's not like a traditional workspace. We have a home, and we converted a basement, a windowless basement, to house everyone with all the computers, servers, equipment, whatnot. And you bring people in, and especially when you don't have a track record, they're nervous. They're like, "You're bringing me to this basement? What are you going to do to me here?" Right? And there was a bit of a training period for us to really figure out what are the skills that we're looking for, what can we provide to them to make it as good of an experience as possible. So we bring them in, we'd make sure that Robert would give them a lot of oversight really up front to help guide them through the process. We get them meals, drinks sometimes, whatever we could to try and keep them happy. And as they started to learn more about what we were doing, what our goals were, and because we were willing to offer flexibility if they had to go out for a trip, if they needed extra exam time or whatnot, that was something that the others weren't offering. Oh, and also we would come in after our work and after their classes in the evenings. We would go till 8, 9, or 10 o'clock, depending on what semester it was, and that allowed them. There's a deer just outside there wanting to eat the fruit. They would. What was I talking about?
You were saying that you would start like 8, 9, or 10.
Oh yeah, regular internships wouldn't allow it, or they don't keep people on board that time. So this allowed them to actually gain that experience during the school year, so that when should they decide to go someplace afterwards, which we wholly expected that they would, that they would actually have that experience and be able to talk about it. We're really proud of our internship program and what we did. We've had guys directly after GXC get hired by Facebook, Google, Microsoft, at their headquarters in California. And the reason that they've come back, they've actually come back sometimes from out of state just to say hi, to check what's going on, literally to just come in and say thank you, because they tell us they go through these interviews and they've learned so much from what they did here on this cutting edge stuff that when they were asked about things during the interviews, they were able to talk about stuff that no one else was really able to touch on. So they were able to get those really quality positions elsewhere. And we've always told them, if you need anything from us, recommendations, what have you, please keep in touch. And we've had a nice chunk of our former interns just coming back or contacting us. We have one guy he's traveling from place to place around the country, continues to send us postcards and stuff years after the fact. So we're really, really proud that these guys have seen value from what we were trying to do, not just GXC in general, but by focusing on them as people. That's something that really needs to change in the higher education space, I think. And there were some people that just decided to volunteer here. There's other people that that through some sort that they would get paid, but let's say even after their internship period, they would stay on. And if these guys decide to go elsewhere, they can get it costs a lot of money to onboard programmers, but some of them have decided to actually stay on anyways, below market value, just because they believe in what we're doing. And again, we're really fortunate that we've had a team that has been able to bond and work together the way that they did. Just naturally, there's been a whole lot of international people that have worked with us. There's actually been 41 people that have contributed to GXC in some way. The majority of which having been either internationally born or women. And, lots of people try and have quotas. We had no such thing. We wanted to bring on the absolute best people that we could. And it just happened to work out that way. And despite us being from all different walks of life, we all had this unified sense of purpose in what we were doing. And, whether we were working in a basement or working remotely or whatever, that was something that we shared and grew over. So I guess by the too long didn't read version of all of this is I got experience back in the day, but when it came to onboarding people now, we looked at younger people who could really use the experience. We tried to be as flexible as we can with them, provide as valuable guidance as we could for them, and really treat them, give them roles, unlike at other internships where you're running coffee, you're doing paperwork or something, actually have them work on stuff that was critical to what we're doing so that they could get that knowledge and learn and grow in their careers. And that seems to have really worked out for them. So that's been one of the secrets to our success at this point.
That's great. Yeah, it's awesome when you give someone that responsibility too, because when you're running for coffee and when you're doing the paperwork and the very mindless or simple acts, like you're not going to get motivated by that. But when you have a pivotal role in a team that's trying to do these innovative things or to do anything worthwhile more than just getting coffee, coffee's great. You're going to put up these young college students are going to put up and do their best and put in that effort. So I love that you're appreciative of that and recognize the pivotal role that they do play on your team too.
Yeah, and you have guys that something was on the tip of my tongue. I already forgot it. Just in general, everyone working together like that, they're having a set purpose. We need to develop this. Coalescing around that, seeing what it's like to work with other team members, because most of these guys outside group projects, they haven't actually worked in a work environment before. Now, after a few years, if they're still with us, they have. But for some of them, sometimes the technical stuff just comes to them, and learning that collaborative process ends up being what they gain the most. And hey, everything's different for different people. Certainly, the technical stuff is what most people get the biggest gain out of. But I've had people talk to me about how that was useful for them as well. And then when you have, let's say, these pilots that are going on for the current group, they're able to see what it's like in an entrepreneurial environment firsthand, where there's not enough people where you could just say, we are allocating this group to do this work. It's like, no, this is now our priority. Everyone drops what they're doing because the client says so. And really managing those client expectations for myself, but then relaying to the team, yeah, I know you were doing something and I sympathize with you, trust me, but we do need to shift to something else. And just seeing what that's like. I know with my consulting work, I ended up, after my time at the clinic, I was hired by a Microsoft-focused consulting firm as a business and technology consultant. And they sent me around the world working for Fortune 1000 companies and banks, and being able to interact with people who might have different work environments, different expectations, of course, different cultures that you have to adapt to. That becomes useful, and these interns are being able to get a taste of that, or even the regular staff that's younger, and I think that's very valuable to them.
Absolutely, yeah. Your resume is quite impressive. I mean, between GXC and of course your work with the clinic and now traveling the world, what part of it do you think, I guess, would be the least expected for you? Because you've had this GXC vision for a long time.
Well, when I went into the GXC stuff, I've been decently proud of my technical acumen, but I never expected to go into IT or technology at all. I expected to be on the business side. Um, and I think it's very important to be able to have the knowledge, or at least some core knowledge of what's being worked on by the rest of the team to truly be that effective manager. But that wasn't something that I was looking into doing. Certainly never IT. When I was on board by that consultancy firm, it was supposed to be, as I was told, about 70 to 80% business work and about 30% technical, and it ended up being about 80% technical until I became a project manager. That came a little bit later, and I worked on some large projects there. But so you're in that type of a position. The job market is difficult. It is still a consulting type of a position where you could move up. So you want to make sure that you like, it's not what you wanted, but I figured, okay, I could at least do it. Some people decide to move away and do different things, but I figured I would give it my best shot. IT itself was something that I was never truly passionate about, but there was a lot I could learn from it. And by working on, let's say, migration projects for companies that are being acquired, learning about the servers and all of those things in a highly technical way, that all has definitely had an impact on what I've done. And I've done a lot of design work on GXC as well. So being able to broaden your horizons to those different areas, I think, has been quite useful. And honestly, being able to do something like that, even though I never expected to go into IT, it was something that I always thought was particularly useful. Let's say you play a video game like Skyrim, if you're familiar with that, or some of these others, and there's a point system for different types of traits, or a level system. Lots of people, they get into a field and they focus on one or two type of areas that you could consider points that are of a high level. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that you could do if, instead of just focusing on one really high level or two, you sort of balance that out amongst a whole bunch of different areas, because there's stuff that people in one field are never really going to be exposed to or learn about, regardless of how intelligent they are, where if you go into these other fields, be it animation, I've looked into that sort of stuff, IT, but be it the arts or sciences or health, and being able to apply concepts in each of those places, you're open to perspectives that you never would have seen before. So I think having that, moderate level in a bunch of areas, and so you'll still have your peak in whatever your specialty is.
Yeah.
But there's just so many opportunities as an innovator or as an entrepreneur that you could end up applying, and maybe that's why I ended up, filing for a number of patents and getting some. It's being just those different perspectives and being able to apply it elsewhere. Hey, they have this problem, and over here they do things this way. If you bring that over there, that might be a good fit. I've already seen that already. So, yeah, IT was definitely unexpected. My concentration at Case was healthcare economics. I think I probably expected at the time to do a bit more on the health side field, but just the way that I've been guided, seeing all the problems with education, knowing what I've experienced in my own life, that I considered problems, because I had some mentors that I thought were really wonderful and other ones that I thought were very poor. Mm-hmm. Being able to adapt for that, I think, is something I wanted to do, and I just ended up going towards this IT area. So now it's like, okay, just apply what I learned in each of these areas, and do the best that I can with it. Don't be afraid to say that you don't know, because the only way you're going to be able to grow as a person and learn about these things is to be able to ask those questions. Don't rely on other people to always answer questions for you, but if you have that question, feel free to ask. Try and explore a bit on your own and move yourself forward as a person.
Emily Dickens, she always said to never lose the dignity of a question.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, she clearly was a very successful writer in her own, so a creator. You started to mention about the patent process, and I truly am not as familiar as I would hope to be. So what does that patent process look like? You have many things that are pending, you mentioned, and also a couple patents of your own already.
Yeah, so first I'll just briefly mention what a patent is, because believe it or not, sometimes I talk with people and they actually have no idea.
Okay.
I've actually been in a room of people once I was talking to my own peers, and no one in the entire room, including the instructor, actually knew what a patent was, and I was completely floored. But what a patent is it's basically a government mandated monopoly over a certain concept or an idea that you can prove. It used to be you could prove that you were the first to invent, but in recent years it actually changed that you were the first to file, just because it was so much more difficult to prove that you were actually the first inventor. As it so happens, I actually got sufficient proof for these first two patents that I got that they were first to invent. And that covers some of the security technology that I mentioned previously. So oftentimes it requires lawyers to get involved because there's so much legalese that is involved in the patent process. What is oftentimes recommended is that you file a provisional patent. Now I'll put you down about $1,000 or so, not that much, but you could get a whole bunch of ideas in there. So if you, let's say, don't have the resources, or you just want to make sure that some competitor isn't going to plant their flag in the ground and say that they were first, that's the way you could get your stuff out there. And it's, all things considered, pretty cheap. You have 1 year to be able to act on that and file a true patent application. And there's a number of rules about that. I don't want to get too technical, but generally you can offer about 20 different claims on a subject, and it, from what I've seen, it's usually you can expand it to as many as 2 different topic areas as long as they are intertwined. There's probably even more ways you could get around it. I'm not a lawyer. This is just from my own experience. So you have to have an abstract written up. You have to do research into the patent database to show that no one else has invented something or come close enough in your space that that there could be considered overlap or sufficiently broad protections under the original patent. Of course, the filing times you have to be right. You need to make sure that you have drawings to illustrate what you've done. You end up having to write out a summary. You end up having to write, with a lot of legalese, a description of what your technology is, to the degree that someone who is, as they say, skilled in the art is able to reproduce it. So,
Dang.
Yeah. So if I'm a technologist, you have to be able to write it so that someone else who is a technologist in the same field would be able to replicate it reasonably enough with what you have written in the patent. And
That's
then
tough, dude.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean the leeway, like who gets to decide if it's close enough? You know what I mean? That's crazy.
Well,
And if it's innovative technology that hasn't, like you're saying, you're the first to file, so not necessarily the first to do, but like clearly a lot of people would have filed if this were common. So.
And then there's applicability as well. For instance, there's cases when you look into this stuff that talk about, let's say you have a wristwatch for frogs. Not exactly useful. You could technically still get a patent for it because, you know, maybe there's some special way that on that little frog arm, leg, you're able to do something that tells time. But the applicability, that seems to be something that's a bit separate. But the bottom line is there's a whole lot of rules that govern these sorts of things. And then when you get to the claims, you have the primary claims and then the claims based off of that. All that fit within those 20. So you basically have your broadest claim that serves as the parent claim to a couple children claims, where you're able to get, well, I definitely want to protect this aspect of it. This other part is important because you want to make sure that other companies or people are not able to replicate what you're doing without getting express authorization from you. Because if they do work on something and they're making money off of it and you have the patent for it, then you could sue them for damages. Mainly for me, I just want protection over what we are doing, because if it is, here's the opposite danger. A lot of people think of patents as a way, well, you hoard them, you have your protections, you sue people, you make your money. What about when you're a small company and you're dealing with the behemoths, and they purposely just try and buy up companies and patents and squash them so that they know that whatever you have is going to cut into their bottom line. They have no interest in developing it themselves. They're making money like mad. So they will try and buy you out or file a patent just so that they could say, for 20 years, you can't do anything in this space because we have the rights to it. And they continue to serve as cash cows.
Makes so much sense. When you have endless amount of resources with capital, you're
as an entrepreneur and someone with my savings to work on, it's stuff like this that becomes very important. I need those protections from myself so that regardless of whether I would want to hold a patent or not, I need to make sure that the people with the resources who get into this space, be it cloud hosting or security or learning management or other technologies, don't take it and say, you aren't going to undermine what we're doing and the good thing we have. Well, it makes it difficult because you really have to choose, when you have limited resources, what to focus on. And you want to focus on just getting the best product as possible. But when you have these guys, and don't anyone tell me that they have, best intentions at heart. I've seen way too many of these guys purposely try and put others under, regardless of how, nice they claim there are. We need to make sure that those protections are there so that we can develop what we need and they can see the light of day and that people can get the proper help that they need. So that's in general the process. So then you file a patent. A technical patent can cost between $8,000 and $15,000 on average. That's a bit of a wide range, but there's reasons why it could be different. What usually ends up happening is you wait 6 months to a year, and someone from the patent office offers a rejection, because that's their job. The reviewer is supposed to poke holes in whatever you're doing. The rejection can be appealed, and unless your plans have changed, it almost always is. For instance, one of the patents I have filed recently for some really useful egress reducing technology, which would allow for actually exponential savings, and that's something I'm excited about. I could talk about later. But that was rejected recently by the patent office with a really weak rejection. I mean, it took like 15 minutes just to say that this would be very easy to counter. But again, that's their job. And my legal counsel ended up saying the same thing. They said, we really aren't worried about this. Part of the problem, though, again, as a small business, is that it's probably going to cost an extra $3,000 to, send it back and make sure that it's checked and all of their dismissals are, wiped away. But that's a very common practice. It's expected. So someone who's filing for a patent for the first time shouldn't be entirely dejected. It's most likely okay if you did your due diligence with the research in the patent database ahead of time. Just file your appeal, explain why. Then usually the next time, some of the stuff gets granted and some of the stuff isn't, and you could either take what's been granted to you or you could file one more appeal. You don't want to file too many appeals because then they'll just say, you know what, it's not worth our time to work with you, and then you're completely dead in the water. But usually they seem reasonable enough where if you say, okay, we'll modify this or that because you're trying to get as broad of protections as possible, sometimes more than you ever expect to get. But then in that back and forth, it's like a trade in fantasy sports. You go back and forth a little bit, and then you settle on something that's reasonable, and hopefully you get the protections that you actually wanted to begin with.
Yeah. Even though we know trading with you in fantasy football is not a
Well,
hopping on there.
that's a different story entirely. But hey, I think that in recent years my trades have been pretty good. But everyone's like, oh, Steve, he has something up his sleeve. No. So yeah, that's generally the patent process, and then it's filed. Then every few years after you get an approved patent, you have to maintain it. So the first time it's like $1,000. Then the second of like 4 years down the road, something I'm not sure about the years. It's like 2,500 if you're a small business, and just every few years it goes by, then it's like $9,000 or $10,000, and it goes up until the maximum, usually 20-year period. So there are maintenance fees. The cool thing about the patent, aside from the protections it gives you as a monopoly in your space for a given period of time, is that then you could always say, I invented something that no one else did before, and you could always carry that with you.
Yes.
So that's really cool, I think.
It's a really nice accolade to have for you. It's a little credit booster for at nothing else.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that again, Steve.
Thank
too.
you.
It's awesome. Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you very
explaining
much.
that to me. You kind of touched on the NFL a little bit with your fantasy football nod. Something that I know just from my knowledge of you and from knowing you and being a friend of yours is that you have had some opportunities to work with the NFL.
Yes.
And of course, there are things within another multi-billion-dollar industry that you can't talk about. But to the extent that you can, what is your role within the NFL? What do you do with the National Football League?
Well, I was actually recommended to the National Football League by a colleague of mine and a good friend from the consulting firm that I talked about beforehand. I was there for a year, and they were opening up a position as a sideline technologist. If you remember Colt McCoy from back in the day on the Browns, there was a concussion that he served, and he was put back into the game, and that caused some good uproar because he shouldn't have been in the game with a concussion where he's wobbling around. So the NFL decided to establish a position based off of that Colt McCoy play, which was a what they call IVRS, sideline technologist, where there's a person at the 50-yard line on the sidelines, and they have this box with Wi-Fi and radio and just generally technical equipment, but also replay equipment as well. So one of the roles that I have is to make sure that anyone who survey the field for injuries, if there is one, that I communicate with the appropriate people on the teams. There's designated doctors, trainers, officials. Make sure that they're able to see what they need to not only diagnose concussions, but also be able to see other injuries as well, because there's an area where players go, where a few areas actually where they can be checked out for those, and we want to make sure that they have the best replays as possible so that those can be checked out on. So with my background in the some background in the health sciences and with technology, that seemed like a decent position. And there's also other technical stuff as well. It is a technical role after all. Hopefully most of the stuff doesn't end up coming up if everything's set up correctly, but it's useful to have someone down there, and also make sure, if there's an injury in the field that someone doesn't see, make sure that gets reported and marked. If there's other technical things that need to be done, make sure that the equipment is properly guarded so that people who shouldn't have access don't have it. Those sorts of things. So again, I'm somewhat limited in what I can say due to the agreement with the league and them being very protective about the integrity of the game. But to this extent, I could say, I end up working on the sidelines, switch teams depending on the week. You are entirely impartial. You always have to focus on what's going on, where the doctors are, all of those things. Make sure all the equipment's up and running, and if something needs to be done, just get on it. Just like when I was working at the clinic, there's something that needs immediate attention. That is your focus. Get it done. Make the decisions that need to be made to move things forward.
Yeah, cool. So is it always in Cleveland? Or do you travel around for different teams, or how does that work for you?
Generally, you're kept to a certain area. So usually there's people assigned to a given city. I've done the Hall of Fame game in Canton
Cool.
a number of times because it's nearby. They can send you to other regions. I've been asked, I believe, about Cincinnati and Minnesota in the past. Just if they've expanded the number of people. It used to be person on the sidelines, then two people, and now they actually have two people in a booth, a medical booth as well, to help bring down feeds.
Cool.
So there's a lot more help than what there used to be. And then there's backups now that they hired as well, so there's much less travel of that sort. But there are other ones that are done. For instance, I've had the good fortune of being able to do a couple international games in London for
cool.
multiple teams. Oh yeah, those are always a hoot, and to be able to see the different stadiums, the different fans like that, it's really really cool. So that's a pleasure. I was somewhat used to traveling to different countries for my consulting position, but being able to do that with the NFL, that had an extra aspect of fun in it due to the type of work as well. So those are fun.
Yeah. When did you start working for them again, Steve?
2016 for the NFL.
2016. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then is it every game? Do you always have a game like each week, or is it more so when they need you? How does that work?
Generally, I guess since I'm the elder sideline tech at this point for our region, usually I end up doing just about everyone. But and I probably could. In years past, I did do everyone. As a matter of fact, I've worked to date every single game that they have. Everyone that I had a chance to do. Except for maybe one in Cincinnati, but that one was an off-site one. All the locally ones for years. I haven't missed one that I was offered. But now with extra people being trained for the position, we want to make sure that they have some experience too, because you don't want someone to go for a year and be a backup and not actually have done anything. So there's I believe 2 games this season that I'm not doing, just so that we could get in some extra work for other people.
Yeah, it's great, and you love it, right?
Oh yeah, no, it's great. You get to be right by all of the players
Right.
and coaches and personnel, and it's amazing that people have to say this, but you shouldn't be taking pictures or doing any of that sort of things on the sideline. I mean, you're in a very unique position. People, just behind you in the stands are paying several $100s a piece for their seat. Act professionally. Don't go up to players and chit chat or whatever. If they come up to you, which happens from time to time, so be it. But you're there for a job. You do your job. You're in a really cool position being there. But realize that it is a job, and do that first and foremost.
And people always push the limits. Like, it's almost like in some ways it's human nature, but in other ways it's just so foolish. Like, just taking advantage of good opportunities like that. Like, if you're going up, you're trying to take pictures with Miles Garrett and stuff like that. It's like,
absolutely. And you want to also interact with the game as well, but in a role like that, you are to be impartial. So sometimes there'll be a touchdown, whether it's for your hometown team or not. It's like, oh, that's great. You watch. It's like you don't have to be a Vulcan. You're allowed to show some emotion, but at the same point, you aren't there to be a fan either. So that is when I see that from you really don't see it around here, which is a good thing. But it's always advised that you just try and act in that professional manner, try and be as impartial as possible, and yeah, as a matter of fact, I always try and make sure while I'm on the visitors sideline that I'm like ultra focused on whatever's going on, constantly checking for the doctors and all that, because I want to make sure that there's no problems whatsoever, that they feel like they can trust you to do what you're supposed to do. Worst thing is if they feel like they don't even want to come by, and then the players are more at risk because there's potentially a problem with them. So And again, there's more technical stuff too, but that's not nearly as interesting as the interactions that you're able to have with people.
Yeah, and have you had any of those with some players or anything that have been
cool
stories with that, I'm sure?
Usually you get the most player interactions. Hall of Fame game is the first preseason game of the year. So you have players, usually rookies, they'll come around, they'll see you in your NFL apparel, and they'll say, am I supposed to be here? Am I supposed to do this or that? It's like, well, I know from years past that you should probably be over there, but I don't know what the procedures are for you and your team. There was a guy from the Cardinals, big, live and type, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. Well, probably over there, but you should ask someone who actually knows for sure. But you're that prominent person, in my case, literally at the 50-yard line, whether it's home or away. So they're always going to be able to see you. Then you have the preseason games, and by the time that the season goes on, there's less of the player interaction, though. Sometimes just because it's convenient, they'll put their helmet there and they'll say a few words, and again, you have to always be careful what you say. But if it's just idle chit chat, usually it's just a word or two. You don't have to be like, nope, can't talk to you, but just it's usually not a problem. Just a lot of times the kickers or the backup QBs, they'll end up coming over, and they'll get a breather. The water boy cart is nearby, so they'll get their Gatorade. They'll say a few words, and then they'll go back. So just to the left of me, there's the quarterbacks, and just to the right, there's the defense. So you're right in the. There's always media personnel swarming around you. I think it's funny because they'll have the microphones with the dead cats on them, and they'll have the mufflers. That's what those are called. Or they'll have a camera, and sometimes because of where I'm positioned, it's like, I'm not moving, guys. Sorry. But they'll have a camera, and it'll be like right next to me, and it's like, I know that's the national feed. No one knows that my face is right next to the national feed. Funny. But yeah, so they do whatever they can to get those angles. They're constantly running back and forth just behind me on the sidelines as well. And because the fields are always changing sides, once they determine that a different angle is needed, you'll see people sprint from one side to the other. So there's a whole lot going on that people don't realize.
Yeah, which is a fun thing that you get to see when you're in the stadium on top of it all, but let alone in your position.
And then they actually even have video camera carts. Usually it's on the visitor line, and it will ride back and forth, so you always got to make sure that you're close to your box so that no one ends up clipping your heels and you fall over. But there's procedures in place to make sure that doesn't happen. There's usually people running in front, get out of the way, get out of the way. So there's lots of inputs just aside from the fans. So whenever there's those fans, shouting to the players, hey, look over here, Zeke, or hey, you suck. There's so much going on that a lot of times they just don't even hear you to begin with.
Sure.
And they're slightly in front of me, so it's probably even harder. But then there's other times where it's like, yeah, there's no way that he's turning around to talk to you.
Do you hear all the sideline banter from the players? Or not so much?
I mean, they're pretty close to me, so I certainly hear some.
Yeah.
Some of it's team dependent for how colorful the language can be.
Sure.
But yeah, you could hear some of it, and again, everything that ends up being said that could end up affecting the outcome of the game or people's perceptions. So that's not something I will say that yes, I hear it, but into the types of things I hear, I'll avoid that for the time being.
For sure. It's just I always just think it's cool. Like I feel like you hear it a lot in a basketball gym. If you're ever near the court, you can hear all the banter. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of communication going on, of course, in any sport, but especially amongst those 5 guys on your team in basketball. So it's.
I'll say this: seeing how when teams are unfocused, there's a lot more of the jovial type of banter. The focused teams, you'll hear what they're talking about, but they're always focused on something. You'll have people, whether or not they're up or not, there's people huddled around one another, and you could end up seeing who the leaders are as well. Are they the coaches? Are they the players saying, we need to do this and that if we're going to, be able to have a chance against these other guys. The focus teams strategize, and I could say that just seeing some teams progress from bad to good or vice versa, you could absolutely see when teams come in how there's a different mindset when they're getting better, because it's pretty universal. There aren't just teams that are just so naturally good. They're great and they're just joking all the time about everything. The best teams, players, are focused.
Yeah.
And there's some teams which I think do an exemplary job of that from what I've seen year in and year out. And maybe people can guess some of them who that they are, but there's a reason why they do as well as they do.
Sure. Yeah, it's just like anything. If you commit to it and you stay focused, you're going to put your efforts that way.
Yeah.
If you're all over the place in your squirrel brains, then, well, you're going to have your efforts all over the place.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff that I'm from less disciplined teams that I'm absolutely shocked that wasn't, by the coaches saying, sit your behind down and focus and do this and that. But that's also how I think, especially as the season goes on, if you could tell if a team is losing control, if optimally the players are engaging themselves and being focused, but then you have the team level or the coach level beyond that, and if you don't see that going on, you could guess that there's problems.
Yeah. Do you feel like the NFL is like increasingly becoming more technological? Because the game in and of itself is what it is, but how do you see the technology evolving in that regard? Do you see it becoming more technological? And I always think about this, like, to give you kind of a idea where I'm coming from, like with the MLB, how the debate is whether or not there should be kind of like a robotic ump, with the strike zone. That's a very constant, incessant debate. So I was just curious in what regard you see it in the NFL.
Well, definitely it's gotten more technological.
Sure.
I mean, even with there's been an upgraded replay system even with what I'm working through this year, and it's absolutely incredible. I love it. Being able to see virtually any conceivable angle, whether it's on the field, up high, all around the stadium, it gives you. It's so useful when you're trying to find those injuries. But I mean, even in general, I think probably the biggest addition is just having all of these cameras inputs everywhere. It's just truly incredible how many that there are. There's dozens of feeds being recorded at any given time, and sometimes, depending on if it's a big national game, there could even be more. The replay systems, I mean, the sidelines is filled with technological stuff. I'm right at the 50-yard line, but there's other equipment. There's racks of phones, there's racks of Surface tablets. It used to be that all the teams would end up printing off, have piles and piles of paper that they would print off for a given quarter, then toss out, and then they're constantly printing stuff to see the plays. Now they see it on tablets, and they just scroll, look at whatever they need to. So there's someone that controls distribution and collection of those. You have the people who deal with the radios, not just the walkie-talkies, but all the stuff inside the headsets. You have the people that deal with all of the ref instant replay equipment. So it used to be those big booths that you remember everyone would go in the back and see, and now they have these little handheld tablets with a view screen that they end up looking into that are actually brought onto the field. So the technology is definitely changing. There was I know recently within the past year or two, the first female CIO of the NFL was hired. They might have actually changed the position so that was the first CIO in general. I'm not sure, but there's definitely a big technical focus. There's always reviews to try and get better technology in, and even from when I started to now, there's been sizable improvements. But if you look like a decade ago, I mean, it really is amazing. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's going to be progressively more ways to see exactly was the foot out of bounds. I mean, this is all speculative. I have no knowledge of this whatsoever. But what if there's sensors in the field to be able to detect where a person touched out of bounds. Was it really on the edge? Was he in or out? More digitized camera angles to see, stuff in the end zone. There's ways I think it could be done. Maybe someday, and again, purely speculative, maybe there'll be sensors inside of the pads that end up seeing was someone being held or this or that. There's a lot of stuff that could be done that could make officiating better. I think outside of viewers seeing different views and ways in the health area, stuff like that which affects officiating, I would take a guess is the next place that the technology will go. Just like in the NFL with the MLB with the strike zone, and in tennis you're seeing some stuff now where the balls go out of the court. That would be my guess. It would be pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I think they're all starting to trend that way a little bit. It seems like I do agree with you. You see it everywhere. Aside from maybe the NBA, but nonetheless. So Steve, to kind of encapsulate all of this, I have a little just fun question for you. I would say. Out of all the players that you've seen, home, away, whomever, who would you say is the best player that you've seen? Granted, you haven't seen every player in the NFL, but who would you say is like the best player you're like? Because I feel like we all have ideas of who's really great, and then seeing it from the 50-yard line, very much so a part of the experience. Like, who would you say is the best player that you've seen?
Best player. I'm not sure if this infringes on impartiality or not, but I will say something just about. What I'll do is I will mention the team that I end up doing the most because of my region is the Browns. And I will say that when you're able to pick out who the leaders on offense and defense are. And if you're talking about best player, there's people whizzing by on the field, so you could talk about best in terms of that or how someone can break tackles. But from what I'm able to see best from my perspective, and which other people I don't think can see, it's how they interact on the sidelines. Who really emerges as the leaders during those times. And there's guys like Mayfield, like Garrett, like Landry. They end up making sure that people are focused, and they do a real good job of that. So it's I think I'm able to say to that extent, they rather than just saying what I see on the field and best player, I will say that those guys, whatever the team is, and generally they're better players or longer tenured backups, which doesn't. That makes sense based off of what you see. There's some guys that are brought in just to, whether in basketball or football, just to be that presence. But
absolutely.
Definitely people with leadership qualities stand out. And that's sometimes why you see guys who are brought back and it's like, why are we bringing him back another year? It's not because of what he's doing on the field. It's because how they keep everyone focused. And it's been good to see. Let's just say, because everyone knows that the Browns have improved, there's been a lot more focus in recent years, and everyone getting on the page to make sure that they have a job to do.
That's great, yeah. And that's like we were talking about teams earlier. Yeah, like the 53rd man on the roster might not be making the biggest influence on the field or whatever, but everyone does have a role, and it's not. These are not handpicked for no reason. Like there is definitely rationale behind it. So I think that is something that's cool that you get to see is maybe a little bit more of that than we do when it's laser focused on TV, right?
And then there's some guys who might do lesser things, but whenever someone needs passes caught, let's say a QB wants to warm up, they'll catch the passes, or if someone wants them thrown to them, someone will come up and throw them. And there's sometimes there's just no question. They're the guy that the people are going to go to because they're always going to make themselves available to everyone else.
Yeah. That's awesome. Bunch of personalities in there. That's fun.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I feel like so we play the Chiefs week 1. The Browns play the Chiefs week 1 next week. Go Browns. It's like seeing a guy, really both the receivers, like Tyreek Hill or like Michael Hardman, just like you said, whizzing down the field.
Oh yeah,
That's got to be nuts because those dudes are freaky fast.
One thing I'll say that when I was before I was working for the league, the way that they focus on players, to me it looked like the linemen were average size, and that the running backs were, these really bulky guys. You get there in person, I'm taller than most of the running backs.
Yeah, right.
They actually look human, so it's there these bulking things. The wide receivers, there's some that are more built. There's other ones that are a bit skinnier type of a build, athletic, skinny type of
tall and lanky.
And then you have the linemen. And the one thing that the video feeds never get are the size of the linemen. They are huge. They are, aside from me being shorter than most of them, which I usually don't end up saying, encountering too many people like that, they are just very large people. I swear sometimes it's like they're or twice the size of the running backs or the wide receivers. So until you see that in person at that close up, it really doesn't sink in. But the video feeds just don't do them justice. They're big guys.
And it's funny when they're squatched down. Like you look at a guy like Josh Allen, who's a pretty tall dude, and then like he looks like he towers over his line. But clearly, that is just not the case when these.
Well, he is a big guy.
He is like 6'4" or something.
He might even be taller than that. But yeah, he's even more of an abnormality. But yeah, those linemen are big. So when they talk about someone who's a 6 foot tall quarterback, and I'm saying he's that's borderline a bit short, I could believe it because a lot of times there's linemen in front of me as well, and I'm pretty darn close to the field, and sometimes my better view is looking at the scoreboards as opposed to what's right in front of me because the size of the players.
Yeah.
I mean that's how it is. Other times you get a perfectly clear view, but that should not be underestimated. Those guys are big, or I'm looking like just over shoulders of them, so I'm able to see just enough. It's impressive.
That is impressive.
Yeah,
that's fun. Yeah, that's so cool. It's just amazing to see like these people that are first of all idolized, but second of all, absolutely exceptional in their craft, and really in their case, like these are behemoths of individuals. So it's fun. Or a guy like Derrick Henry, like watching him like break through
and the different builds too. Like some of them are heavy set. Other guys are ripped. And, they could be playing the same position. And sometimes if you're a lineman, it doesn't matter which one you do. Mm-hmm. I remember, who was it, Ted Washington, who was 400 pounds when he played for the Browns. Couldn't really move around all that much, but man, he was, big guy back in the day. You have other guys, I'm sure you've seen Joe Thomas now, how much more ripped he's gotten and how much weight he's lost from being a left tackle. So it's it is something. Usually you just see the guys end up getting heavy when they retire, but kudos to him for being able to get ripped like that.
True enough. Yeah. So Steve, that's awesome. It's a great opportunity that you get on your weekends. What does your work week look like when you're working with GXC, and then of course you end your weekends with the NFL? But how do you manage that? How do you balance getting out and having some fun, experiencing the world a little bit?
Yeah. No, well, unfortunately at our stage, there's not too much of that. What it used to be for me, let's say I'm graduated, I got my graduate degree, let's say I'm at the consulting firm. Mm-hmm. I would go in, if I'm on site, whatever, I'd go into work, come back home, and then typically in the evenings I would go to our residential workspace and work with all of the interns and staff and Robert there. But as of 2019, wait, am I getting that right? 1, 2, yeah. As of 2019, I ended up leaving the consultancy position as a project manager to focus on GXC full time. So my workday now it's hard to really differentiate where the workday begins and ends.
Sure.
I get up, and it's GXE. And there's some guys who are able to work more in the morning than in the evenings. There's other guys who prefer to work late. So basically, all day, I need to make sure that I'm available to these guys, finding out the progress in certain areas, saying, hey, such and such you need to collaborate with him on this, do stuff like that. So really, morning until night, it is just GXE all the time. Now that does give me ample time to, if I'm making designs, for instance, because in addition to whatever business activities I'm doing, I have to be able to reach out to potential clients, for instance. I also need to and maintain expectations with those right now who are running pilots with us. I also need to make sure that the technical side is going well. I basically, the title I give myself is operations director.
Okay.
And even though everyone recognizes I'd be what would usually be considered the president or CEO, I don't like giving that type of a role or a name until someone's established. I think it really waters down the type of position those have, because there's serial entrepreneurs out there that talk about I'm a 5-time CEO, blah blah blah. It's like, no, are you trying to make it seem like you're some brilliant type of Superman? Chances
Sure.
are that how many of those ended up even working out to begin with? I don't feel right applying that title to myself until we are fully established, profitable, all of those things, whether or not it is or not. So I just focus on what makes the most sense. Operations, making sure that we're able to get the resources that we need, that those guys that we have on staff are doing what they can do best. Making sure that for technical roles, I'm able, for the technical areas that I'm able to contribute, that stuff is designed properly for any sort of images, whatnot, that those get created. So when you're young, or in a business like this, you have to wear, as they say, all sorts of different hats.
Absolutely.
And I'm wearing all sorts of different things just all day long.
Yeah. So does it feel like it changes at all, or does it feel more kind of Groundhog Day like? I don't mean that in a negative way.
No, it does. It honestly does. And, we're in a very different situation from most startups, because usually when you have a startup, they say, 6 months to 9 months, that's a long time to have to wait to get your product out there. Okay, that's fine if you're working on widgets. When you're working with enterprise class software, or things that have the implications like we're working on, there's just no way that you can do something like that. And it's actually, I lament that the age of the solo entrepreneur is basically dead. Because, yeah, there's stuff that you could do on your own. I shouldn't say essentially dead, but if you're looking to do stuff on the technical side, it doesn't matter how good you are, you just need extra support. That was actually a big issue for me for a while when I was just starting up, is that I wanted to be that type of an individual. Just do as much as I possibly could. And, that trying to balance so many things. I could remember I had I call it a bit of a mental breakdown in 2012, just because there was so many things going on. I don't know if that's the proper term, medical or not, but it was the one time I can really focus on in my life where it was like, I can't, to actually admit I can't deal with this. There's too much going on, because there was school, there were a whole bunch of things I was dealing with at the time. There were some people online that were slandering me as well. So it was just a whole headache, and I had just graduated from Case. I'm trying to find, my place in the world, trying to make sure that, I'm, people understand that I have certain skills and knowledge, and just trying to do too much at the same time. And for me, actually saying, I cannot do all of this. I think that might have been the hardest thing that I ever had to do.
Sure.
Because whether it's reasonable and logical or not, it just came across to me as failure. And that is, it's a hard thing for someone who's, for a long time, always growing up for me, I wanted to, you had to be the best in school. Why are you being the best at school? So that you can make sure that you get into a good college. Why are you getting into a good college? So that you can make sure that you have a good career. Why do you want a good career? So that you could make enough money so that you could eventually retire. Everything was focused on work and betterment. And to get to a point, you don't have enough experience when you're younger, even if that is your focus, to really know what the limit is. The mindset is sort of, limits are made to be broken. Not even in a bad way, but you just don't know as high as you can go. So someone like me, I just kept on pushing and pushing and pushing, and the weight was too much. It was going to start crashing down a bit. So after that happened, I had to tell myself, I need to let go of everything that wasn't important. That means focus on school, focus on GXC, and everything else is extraneous, just get rid of it. And my mindset after that improved significantly. And to an extent, I'm glad that I was able to find out what that limit was.
Yeah.
So that whatever I did in the future, maybe I'm able to push beyond it in the future, but I know what is a very realistic limit that you should probably not be playing with for too long unless you want to get burnt. So growing from that point, it was a learning experience, and getting to where I am today, there's a lot of hats that I have to wear, but it's manageable enough because I know how challenging things were back then and that ultimate limit that I really pushed. I do think that it would do me good to be able to have some more off time. Like if I go on a trip, I love traveling. I absolutely love traveling, and I love planning trips. As a matter of fact, most of my friends and even some former coworkers, they all ask me to plan the trips for them because they know that I get them the best deals. They know that I know the local places. To me, that's fun. I want to experience those types of things. And I haven't gone anywhere in, a few years now. I mean, the pandemic, of course, that helped extend everything, but everything's just focused on making sure that we get to the next step, making sure that everyone's happy. And that's why it's so important for me to be able to, I told you the challenges of getting people to try your technology in the, I try predominantly in throughout Ohio, them having those concerns and having to establish, your track record. How demoralizing do you think it was to have people tell you consistently, and sometimes even outside of education and other fields, that what you have is better than anything else that they've seen or tried? Yeah. I had a major hospital, actually, someone who does their what's called CME, Continued Medical Education Training, who runs their technology for that, said something similar. What you have is better than what we have now. But the amount of change that we would have to do, or the risk that we have by bringing on someone your size without prior experience, we aren't going to do that. So, I mean, that's incredibly demoralizing. It's like I've done everything that I could. Yeah. I somehow managed to get this to the spot that it's at. If 7 months to 9 months is considered long, we've been doing that, working again progressively more as time goes on for a decade now. You know, we've sacrificed my team in general, but myself and Robert. There are relationships. There's, you know, just growing up like normal people.
Sure.
That's gone. One of the things that I was trying to do when I first founded GXC, and I don't really tell this to people. Yes, there's that absolutely that purpose behind it. But I was hoping that if it was successful, you know, I had worked so hard to be able to get in. Case was my first choice. I didn't apply. I applied to a few places, but I wanted to stay locally. I had family members that had ailments, whatnot, so it didn't make sense to go someplace else.
Yeah.
I worked hard to be able to get into Case. I got a very nice scholarship there, so it was much more affordable. I did well at Case, but everything was, you know, I want to be able to do well so that those experiences I missed out when I was younger, I'd be able to do that.
Yeah, amen.
And it never happened. By the time I started something like this, you really want to make a difference. You actually want to do something that, you know, you hear people in government all the time talk about how they want change or whatnot, and they don't do jack.
Right.
I firmly believe that any person has the ability to change the world. Circumstances might have to be right, but the whole idea that, you know, that's impossible, I think that's a load of bull.
Oh, absolutely.
I saw problems that I thought needed major correction. Some of which I touched on today, other ones which, you know, maybe some other time. But I wanted them to be solved, and I had a path to doing it. And I would talk to some people about it. Of course, there's the people that accepted it. There's, you know, I can clearly remember talking to one investor in particular when I was younger. It was the longest I had ever driven to a place in my life. And I went into his office, and within 13 minutes, I was laughed out of his office. Because I came up with a plan for how the type of personnel that we would need to do something of this size and the costs involved. And he just said, you know, that's you don't know what you're talking about. What a load of crap. And as it turns out, my projections were very accurate. But you have to have people take you seriously. And if there's one piece of advice that I wish I knew back then, it's that I was under the wrong impression that what matters most for success, for let's just say generally financial success, was that if you had the best of something, and, you know, not just like a little bit ahead. That's one of the things that they always tell you in business school. If you're doing something innovative, you can't just be a bit ahead. You have to be a good measure ahead of the competition. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you just aren't going to have the repertoire. If you were the best, and best by a good enough margin, you would win. And people would see you, and people would recognize you. And that's not true. I've seen countless people with connections be able to get in certain positions. And, you know, I don't, as disappointing as that is, you know, they're taking advantage of what's available to them. That's not something that can be dwelled on.
Sure.
But it is a reality that I found out through my experiences. You know, I don't have the connections, you know. It is what it is. I went into this field of technology and education without knowing anyone in the field because we saw what some of the solutions could be, and we went for it. And I think we did a damn good job of it. But it's so clear now that having some people with those connections is important, and that's why, you know, now with the pilots that are going on, we're able to gain the repertoire, and it's very effective to be able to. It's probably the most, word of mouth is probably the single most effective way to get an LMS adopted in education, because now you have the track record, you're being recommended from someone else. It's really, really hard to get in, but once you're able to get in, there's a whole lot of opportunities available to you. And I think that on features alone, cost aside, we should be better than the other guys, and with cost involved, we should be blowing them out of the water.
Yeah.
So very excited about what's coming up in the in the future.
Yeah.
But I wanted to reclaim some of what I felt I lost in my childhood, and now I just acknowledge what has happened. Now I have a whole decade beyond that you could say was lost. Now I know it's not lost. We've been able to do. I've gotten the patents. I've gotten a ton of work experience. We've advanced this to points that these and other technologies have never gotten to before. That has meaning. That will become very important. But from a personal standpoint, it's something that at this point you just have to accept.
Yeah.
You aren't going to get back that time.
Yeah.
Those memories that you initially wanted to strive for, that's gone. And, I am incredibly thankful that I was born in a situation, even without those connections, where I could at least have the roof over my head, be able to eat, get into a good school, because I had a good family structure.
Mm-hmm.
In this era, no less, an era where access to education and all these other amenities we have is readily available, From that perspective, the opportunities available to me are beyond what virtually anyone throughout human history has had.
Yeah.
And I feel that I have a moral obligation to pursue that the best that I can. To really make sure that, because for one reason or another, through, the grace of God and my perseverance and my circumstances, we've been able to get to where we're at. And now that, I know that there's no way to get some of that time back, those experiences, I could at least take solace in the fact that if this does succeed to the way that we imagine it could, then it still would have all been worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
You can see I'm getting a bit emotional here, because it is difficult. It is really difficult. You said, is it like Groundhog Day? Yeah. Even though different things are happening each day, it happens so much that, just like in the movie, it's like, what can I do differently to get me out of a loop?
Right.
People aren't, sometimes I'll take on a challenging project. So, maybe it's I'm going somewhere to do interviews or doing something else with the media, just outside of GXC entirely, just because getting some feedback, positive feedback, proof that you've advanced and accomplished something, even if it's difficult, whatever it is. Now that's something that you just don't get when you're building something for a decade. Who's giving you feedback? Your team? Well, that's good. Your parents? Okay. Your friends? Maybe. How about the people in the positions of power? Are they going to even listen to you? I mentioned the one guy who laughed me out of the office in 13 minutes. The next one I went to, it was an organization where I presented in front of a panel. There were over a dozen people listening to me, and started getting windy outside. It started raining, and they said, "You know what? There was like another 10, 15 minutes to go in this." They said, "You're done, right? I think we're just gonna get up and go." Like, okay.
Yeah.
And then you have to, say, is everything that's been done worthwhile? Now, that was a long time ago. That was early on. That's what helped me realize that due to the expenses that it would take to develop some of this stuff, first of all, they don't see the vision. And you think I'm verbose now. I was way, way more verbose back then. Because I believe that for people to want to, let's say, invest in something, they had to actually truly understand the technology behind it. So I would want to break it down and make sure everything was covered. No. Those types of people care, do you have money, or are you generating money, and what's the potential to go beyond that? It doesn't...
At Shark Tank.
Yeah, it is frustrating, though, because there's a lot of charlatans and a lot of people that, someone with knowledge in the area would be able to pick apart. And I know my stuff pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been difficult for me to move beyond that. But I realized I would have to fund it myself until we got to a point that people would actually see what the true vision was. And now we have a number of patents. We have a number of ones pending. And getting that sense of financial security, because everything I've done, whether it's my work with the clinic, the consulting firm, the NFL, stuff that I've done like sell on eBay, or one of the things I haven't mentioned was buying and selling anime goods or original animation materials. I have a good deal of knowledge in that area and have been doing that for a while. All that money goes into GXE.
Yeah.
Everything has to cover, even though they're taking below market value money, we know that we need several people to work on it at once, and I'm just doing every bit of money I get, it just goes right into that. So there's really not much time for enjoyment or traveling or doing whatever else I want to. And in terms of the Groundhog Day, you just try and hope for the client or opportunity that moves you beyond where you're at, so that you could then have that financial security and say, you know what, I'm allowed to take a break because I'm not going to go broke within the next week if I do take one.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, when I take a vacation, if it's a day or two, I can't relax. I need a full week at least to be able to actually relax to the point where by the time I get back, I'm recovered. Because there's just so much that's on my mind, so much that tries to burden me. It's a big challenge.
Yeah,
and
you're a thinker. You're quite a thinker.
Oh, and just the obligations, thinking aside, just there's so much. And that's one of the things that I think, because I've been working on this for so long and most other people don't, in this type of a state, that is really difficult. It's the mental strain and the constant having to remind yourself that what you're doing is worthwhile. It's no one ever said it was going to be easy. You knew it was going to be difficult. It was more difficult than even you anticipated with your best projections, and being very rational and reasonable about it. But to just say it makes sense, it's logical, it will get better, and eventually you start creating those relationships that open up the opportunities. To me, nothing's more valuable than an opportunity. If you're able to get that, then the sky's the limit. But those doors have to be opened up, and if no one's going to open them for you, you have to establish it. And so yeah, I got a bit off topic of the original Groundhog Day, but it's something that I think is most people will not be able to understand, even if they are in entrepreneurship, having to do something for so long. I consider myself very grateful that I do have this knowledge of business and that I'm very resourceful to have been able to extend my funds. I mean, we're talking, I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, several $100,000. No external investment from others. We're just, I'm actually just talking with an organization now to potentially get a sizable grant, and then that would end up, that was from a recommendation from an investment firm, and if we get the grant, then there's a decent likelihood that they would want to invest. So it's like it's taken a very, very long time, and I don't think anyone will really understand, other than my coworker Robert, who also had co-founder Robert, who also had to give up so much in terms of relationships. We wanted to not have to accept, the white picket fence and the dog as our limitations. That's something that he brings up a lot. We wanted to say that we were able to do something more and make that difference. And, there's days where, damn, if that white picket fence and that, spouse and that dog ain't the most attractive thing in the world.
Yeah.
But we're this far along, and we are still, despite this, we're still really excited about it, because we finally have our first pilots. We were able to get in contact with these people working internationally, able to gain the repertoire over there. Then there's a logical path. We'll be able to get it here, get the investment to work on some other things, including a technology, as I briefly mentioned before, would exponentially lower server or data egress costs, data transfer. In short, one of the things that we have developed, if there's 30 people watching a course or downloading a file, this would lower the costs of doing so by about 6 times. Wow. If you have 1 million people watching a viral video, savings of 56,000 times. That's not a typo or a misspeak. 56,000 times.
Oh my gosh.
And I actually submitted something to the National Science Foundation about this as well. A lot of people talk about, maybe you talk with some other people about blockchain on your podcast. One of the big problems with blockchain is that it's great as a ledger for taking information, but it's not great for much larger data transfer. By utilizing peer-to-peer protocol, we have a way to be able to do this, and more importantly, automate it. So that, for instance, one of the reasons that torrenting technology, it's been around for a long time, oftentimes used with or associated with pirates, but it still has other uses. I think one of the main reasons that hasn't been much more popularized is because people don't understand it. It has to be done for them automatically, otherwise they wouldn't want to touch it. And so it stayed in that more technical, piratey type of a realm. By adapting that type of a peer-to-peer technology and applying it so that when people are subscribed, let's say, to a certain channel, or they're in a certain course where everyone's getting the same type of files, or at least maybe not all at once, but generally the class is taking about themselves, there are a plethora of benefits. There's way less server stress. There's way better speed of download because you're getting it from a bunch of different sources. You're able to work better in low internet areas, because if you have a download and your internet cuts out, usually after about 30 seconds, you're done. You have to restart from scratch. With peer-to-peer type technology, it just resumes. So one of the big problems in education, I know I'm skipping all over the place.
No, go ahead. All good.
A big problem with education, with what people have said, is that people in lower income areas don't have good internet access. They say that they can't afford broadband. That's one of the reasons why there's a federally mandated program right now to actually offer free broadband so long as there might be remote schooling. But what you do about data, or if students are on the go, there's a person who works as a technology instructor that I know in the Los Angeles Unified School District. It's the largest school district in the United States. And he says he tried to teach courses, and the number of times that a student would end up having to leave because they're in their car, maybe there's a doctor appointment, one thing or another, it happens all the time. Something like this would eliminate that, because if it's been pre-recorded, they'll continue to get information after the fact. If it's live, they could still end up getting information from other sources if it's being downloaded to their devices. Basically, there's a whole lot of benefit there, and here's the big kicker. Those cost savings, we were able to get our costs natively low enough so that if we run 2 pre-roll ads, a pre-roll ad is a 5 to 15 second ad that happens before a video starts. If we run 2 pre-roll ads under our current system in the United States, and that's important because ad revenue is different in the United States and other regions, we would be profitable. So we could actually offer a free learning management system that does as much as more as all of the other comparators have, and have it run for essentially completely free if media isn't being used, but for video, 2 5 to 15 second ads per HD high definition video hour. If you look at a group like or YouTube, they run on average 9 ads per video hour. We're even saying HD video hour. And by making a pre-roll, and we have ways to actually track how this is likely to be, which I won't get into right now, we make sure that it's non-intrusive. We don't want there to be banner ads or anything else. Something like that, let's say if they could even start playing when people are filing into our class, then that's great, because these lower income school districts are now able to utilize a highly capable video-centric learning management system. With however much they're paying for Zoom or whatever, it's going to be better for them to do it that way than have nothing. If they want to pay the 10 cents per gigabyte stored per month, 10 cents per gigabyte stored per month, or 20 cents per gigabyte transferred, they can do that as well. You could set it up so that if you want, and the reason we have that very unique price structure, because what other schools or what other LMS providers do is they do it on charge on a yearly basis for the number of students, but there's also a floor for the number that you have to do. So let's say you have a small school or a class of, let's say, 24 or something. You have to, for some of these LMSs, purchase a minimum of 600 licenses. And that could really push the cost of the licenses very high. One of them, actually, their highest offering is $1,200 per student per year. If you look at the lower end stuff, it's much more reasonable, but then there's no video, there's no, or virtually no media transfer. Everyone gets like 50 megabytes or something a year for storage space. It's like, come on, I've made PowerPoint presentations that are 2 gigs. Okay. Yeah. So what that's the schools can choose if they want to do 4K picture-in-picture video. Fine, then they're going to be charged for the data transfer. If they want to do something that is free for everyone, they can do that as well. Now, there will be a cap to HD video quality in that case, but most people would probably be happy with regular HD quality if they're getting everything for free. Now, how does this other technology, this peer-to-peer technology, go in? What's nice is it's a stackable technology based off of what we have. So it's not like we're removing one for the other. We already have our cost savings. And when we're talking about getting to these regions, like in India or third world nations, where you really can't, they definitely can't afford to pay for the system, but where the ad revenue is also really low, so you need enhanced a few times over the cost generation that we were getting from the ads here, this allows us to do that. So what we want to do now is develop this peer-to-peer this automated peer-to-peer technology, which allows for exponential cost savings. That would mean that even in those nations, within the United States, you run one ad, and your per HD video hour and you're golden. Great. We got the US covered, seemingly.
Yeah.
You go to those other regions and you could still, because there's so little revenue generated from the ads, you might have to do a little bit more. Let's say you're running 3 ads, maybe 4. But if they're 5 to 15-second ads and they have nothing that they could use in those places, let alone with the capabilities with video and stuff on cell phones, because actually in other countries, Eastern Europe, Middle East, Africa, having a cell phone is way more common than a computer. Way, way, way more common. I mean, you look at the phone plans, even in the third world country, everyone's carrying around a smartphone because it's just that inexpensive with the plans set up there. Well, if they have the devices already, we already made sure that we were able to get it on. We made it mobile-centric. We have it be video-centric. They have their data access. We allow them to be able to use this peer-to-peer that's already built in. And now you have students in the poorest regions of the world that are able to get free access to education.
Beautiful.
That is solving a major problem.
Yeah, you're doing it, Steve.
Yeah. And,
Exactly.
and that's why I can deal with having spent all of this time to do so, because the implications are so enormous, not only for educating people, having them have better lives, but having there be peace throughout the world, because there's less famine, there's less people desperate, more openness to different ideas. It would make it all worthwhile many, many times over. Now there's one final, well there's more, but one other benefit I'll mention about this. There's no reason why this technology only has to be used with our learning management system. If we develop an APK, basically something that could be put into third-party applications, we could have this be utilized for other companies as well. So if we're generating, let's say, if you have classes, you're a lot more likely to get that 30-person class and the 6 times class savings. Less likely to have the viral type videos where you'll get that 56,000 saving. But what's to say others wouldn't? Or what's to say we couldn't focus on something that generates those cost savings? You put it in other apps, let's say just regular or companies with their server blocks, where they it would have to have some device integration, but any company that ends up transferring a lot of data would be able to utilize this and save massive amounts of money. If you look at data hosting providers, so talk about Microsoft Azure, talk about Google Drive, we'll talk about Amazon Web Services. You're talking about, at least as I understand now, for Amazon Web Services and Microsoft, their single biggest revenue drivers are not operating systems, not their store business. It is cloud services. The majority of Amazon's is cloud services.
Well,
that's why you're talking, each of these, $1 trillion or more of their value is based off of that part of their business. So you're talking among the 3, multiple trillion. They charge about 12 cents per gigabyte transferred on average. They sometimes they go 11. There's variations, but it's about 12 cents. The data storage is, if you go down to their server level, it can be about 5 cents per gigabyte per month. Wait, no. I need to double check on that one. But bottom line is, for the egress, it's 12 cents per gigabyte per month. So with our initial pricing, there was a certain value add that we're saying, you don't have to watch any ads, we developed this. So it's more than just beyond data storage, but really not that much more. We tried to make it reasonable. By having something where, as long as you maintain this APK once developed, it could be plugged in anywhere, so there really aren't extra costs. So if we say we're going to charge zero point 0.2 cents per gigabyte transferred, it's pure profit to us. It completely blows the other guys out of the water. Now, I've had some people say to me, and I haven't talked about this that much because it's a newer thing that we're working on. Why on earth wouldn't they just do it then? They're the big guys. Why on earth would Microsoft or Google or Amazon not just do this themselves if they could get that good of cost savings? And I would say this: they're generating the costs from these other businesses. If their egress costs were to plummet, if their data transfer costs were to plummet because less and less would have to come from their servers. That's the thing. The more that this is utilized, it's being shared among peer-to-peer, multiple different devices in a network, that means that they aren't getting as much usage from their servers, which means that their revenue generation is going to absolutely plummet. If that's their biggest revenue driver, and hey, you could get tens of thousands of whatever the cost savings are, it is going to hurt them directly. So they have zero incentive whatsoever to try and offer this. It's like, okay, you cut off half your body. Why would you do something like that?
Yeah.
So this is a type of technology which I think it's so incredibly critical that is patented, and that's why I'm going through the process right now to make sure that we have sufficiently broad protections to make sure that they can't quash it. Something like that. I think that the LMS and what we're doing there, that is the furthest along right now, and it has the greatest potential for incredible moral good. If you're looking for a financial windfall, being able to adapt this peer-to-peer technology into an APK and distribute it that way, I mean, it's insane the amount of money that could save businesses. So they would absolutely want to go with us when it's, even more than slashing their costs. I mean, it absolutely makes them plummet to rock bottom. But that's also why, because I've been asked, why wouldn't these other companies do that? Because they aren't going to cut off their own leg. They'll do everything that they can to try and stop it if they become aware of it. But so that's I'm excited about that and other things that we're working on, and hopefully we get in front of the right people where we say, hey, this is what we were working on. It's due to a direct result of that and the cost constraints in these other countries that we were able to conceptualize this technology to solve that problem. But guess what? It's not exclusive to education. We could do this elsewhere as well. So you're not only getting the optimal, if you invest in us, you not only get that optimal moral good that will help people around the world, you should be able to get a very hefty financial windfall as well. So that's
the perfect storm right there.
It's the long game play.
Yeah.
And, as much as doubt can creep into even my mind about, does it make sense? Is it all worth it? I go through everything in my mind again, and I say it all makes sense. Yeah. So I just have to have faith and continue to do the best as I can, but have faith and try to orient myself to that life of optimal moral good and hope that it works out for the best. But one thing people don't know about me, I'm actually a very God-centric type of a person. I don't end up talking about it a lot because I think when you talk with people about moral issues, they tend to drown it out. They tend to see you more as a fundamentalist, even if what you're saying is perfectly reasonable. It's like people don't want, especially if they aren't focused on God to begin with. They don't want to hear about those things. So taking more secular arguments by about the benefit of the greater good, that tends to resonate with some people. So I try and orient myself that way, and hopefully again, it all works out for the best.
It will. The world's lucky to have you, Steve. You know that?
I pray that I just want to be able to do what I can to the best of my ability. If I'm able to do that and do a good job of it, then I could say that my life was all worthwhile, and I'll be happy.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Steve, is there any final closing kind of thoughts or remarks that you'd like to share to the listeners, to a specific audience?
Wow. Well, what's incredible is that there's even more that I could end up talking about, not only about these issues, but some of the other work I've done at the past. So if you ever get bored, no one that wants to come on for some reason, maybe I talk with you again.
I'd love to, whenever you want. Yeah.
All right, but I covered a good amount today. I would just say that if there's something that's very meaningful to you and you have sufficient evidence to back it up, even if it's going to be a difficult journey, give it strong consideration. I again consider myself extraordinarily fortunate that I had enough of a family structure behind me, that I was able to have the opportunity to get to this point. Nothing to me is more important than establishing opportunity. If people have better access to opportunities, I think the world will be a much better place. I think you can't effectively mandate outcomes, but if people have fair and equitable access to opportunity, however that is, it can really create some great things in the world. And absolutely. I don't claim by any stretch of the imagination to have all the answers. I question even myself if I have reasonable answers for what I've focused so much of my life on. But, I had a mentor. I didn't get to really talk with him that much, but his name was Samuel H. Miller. He was the owner of Forest City Enterprises. Forest City is the biggest property owner in Cleveland. And he told me stories about his life. I met him. He allowed me to go up to his office when I was in high school. I was either 17 or 18. Now he owns Tower City among everything else. So I went up to the 13th floor at Tower City, went inside there. There are pictures all over the place, books stacked everywhere. And he talked to me. Now this gentleman was a multi-billionaire. He had no reason to talk with someone like me, and it was incredibly fortunate. I even had a chance to talk to him that once. But I credit him with actually helping me to go into business. And he asked me some questions, and I was talking to him. He said, I could tell within 30 seconds. I could assess a person within just 30 seconds to see what type of a person they are. He says, and I could tell that you are a very good moral person. He says, if you decide to go into business, because I wasn't sure then, I just caution you that if you're too good in business, you'll get eaten alive. Now, this is a person, he contributed to many charitable causes. If you go to the Cleveland Clinic, there are various buildings named after the Millers because they've given so much money to the hospital. And there's buildings all throughout the city that are named after them. He basically said it's very rough world out there in business, and people are going to act dishonestly. And I've always tried myself to tell the truth, to live in that positive way, and I've seen over times there are ways that you could still live that honest life in business. There are so many people that choose to take an alternative path because it's easier. Frankly, it would be so incredibly easy to earn money if you're an immoral person and you know what you're doing. It's actually kind of scary. But if you want to actually be that positive change, you know, you shouldn't. There are ways to be able to do it. And you know, I've had people think that, oh well, someone in business, you know, no one ever good comes out of business. That's this type of skill that I have, and I'm going to use that, whether it's operations or whatever, to the best of my ability. And I guess just to encourage people that if you do decide to do something that truly makes a big difference, it could well be the most challenging thing that you ever end up doing, because there's a decent likelihood that, you know, government won't help. It'll just be you and your dreams, and you'll have to figure out ways to get it done. That doesn't mean that you can't make that difference. It doesn't mean that you can't make that impact. But it is a very long road, and it's longer than you ever expect. I guarantee you, I put forth the best possible projections that I could, and even though I got the amount of effort and financials reasonably correct, there's just variables that you can't reasonably account for until you see them firsthand. So, you know, I guess I'll just end with that. It's a rough world out there, but there's so many opportunities where if you come up with a new idea. I used to be worried that, you know, by the time I grew up, I remember being in high school, will there be enough ideas left for me to pursue anything? And now I realize that there's just so many, far beyond my comprehension. You'll be okay. Keep on pursuing those dreams, and I will continue to pursue mine.
Yeah. Steve, I'm excited to see what happens with GXC. You guys are working hard. You're doing some really great things. And, of course, when it comes to fruition, I'm excited to see all the moral good that you're doing. And, of course, hopefully you can take a nice little trip, or many trips around the world.
I could really use that so badly.
So I will talk with Steve and incorporate all the different links and things into these videos and post it, whether you're listening on the podcast or if you're watching this on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in. This has been a wonderful chat. So, Steve, thanks for being on.
Thank you. All the best to you. God bless.
This has been another Chats with Clark. Thanks for tuning in.